you're watching Talking Europe on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson, and we are at the European Council in Brussels on the occasion of the European Union-African Union Summit. I'm here in the presence of the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
I'd like to start off, before we get to these African topics, by talking about the situation around Ukraine, which is such a concern at this point. Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, said on Thursday that the EU still wants to find a diplomatic resolution to this, and he's calling on Russia to de-escalate. Are you seeing signs of de-escalation?
Well, we're hearing about the escalation, but I think we need to see it as well. I mean, words are easy. We need to see actions. I think de-escalation would be a good thing. I think what we've seen and the provocations that took place the last days are not a good thing. No one is waiting to have a war on the European continent. What we have seen is a lot of European and NATO unity, and I think that surprised quite a few, maybe even a little bit ourselves. I think there was a lot of unity in making very clear that countries are sovereign in their choices, that the NATO architecture is an architecture that is there to stay, and that we don't accept this concept of spheres of influence. But I really hope that indeed we see a de-escalation in the next days.
You talk about EU unity, that's something Charles Michel spoke about as well. But on that issue, we have seen different EU states taking slightly different tacks. For example, France and Lithuania have sent weapons to Ukraine, Germany not doing so. In terms of sanctions, there was a meeting about potential EU sanctions on Thursday. Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, wasn't even present at that meeting. And we know that he has criticised previous EU sanctions on Russia. Are you confident that if Russia does make a move against Ukraine, that the EU 27 will be unified in the response to that?
I have little doubt on that, but I really hope that we don't have to get to that. And I think that getting into a new escalation of sanctions would be to the detriment of everyone. I mean, an invasion in Ukraine would be something completely unseen. So I really hope that the diplomatic way is the one that is being followed. But we really have to see some advancement in practice now.
Let's talk about some other hot news from this week, which came in just before the summit began. President Macron announcing that he's pulling out French troops from Mali. How concerned are you about the knock-on effect for security in the Sahel region, which we know does have quite a high degree of instability, jihadist terrorists, for example?
I think the evolution is unfortunate, and Belgium has been active since a long time in the Sahel region. We were active in Mali, we're still active in Niger. I think the task force Takuba indeed cannot continue. What is important is that other things we're doing in Mali today, like the EUTM, which is a training mission, that will be perpetuated, that will continue. And I think it's important to not just break any ties with Mali. We are very concerned about political developments, but the moment you break ties, you don't have any influence at all anymore. It's important for the region, it's important for Europe that the Sahel region gets stabilized. But we Europeans cannot do it alone. We can only do it when we work together with local authorities who share the same ideas and the same values. Unfortunately, for the moment in Mali, that link is broken. But we have seen that the intention of the other countries in the Sahel to work together with Europe are actually quite strong.
Is it perhaps, though, on the European side, a reason to maybe think twice about the kind of pan-EU defence cooperation that Emmanuel Macron has been pushing for in recent years?
No, I think that element is still very valid. You know, NATO, of course, is the cornerstone of our collective security in Europe. But NATO can only function if we Europeans are also united and we also pull our weight. That would be to the benefit of the whole of NATO. That concept of strategic autonomy is not only related to the military side, to defense. It's also related to big parts of our economy, which we have seen over the last months have become much more geostrategic. The whole healthcare industry and vaccine production has become a major element in global diplomacy. And we see that also semiconductors production and so on, all these domains are becoming way more geopolitical. That does not mean that we as Europeans would turn our back to the rest of the world. We will still be the biggest supporter of trade, but we also have to see it in a strategic way and maybe be a bit less naive than what we have been in the past.
Well, speaking of the economy and geopolitical strategy, that leads us quite nicely into the EU-African Union summit.
Yep.
One of the issues, one of many, many issues being spoken about here is to do with health, COVID vaccines. Of course, Belgium has a very developed sector of COVID vaccine production. South Africa and others have been pushing quite hard for a temporary waiver of the COVID vaccine patents. Any possibility that the European Union will say yes?
Well, as European Union, we've used a very pragmatic approach, which was what can we do to help the African population as fast as possible? And if we compare the European exportations and the donations, and we compare it to other countries, and you compare their announcements to what has been done in practice, we really don't have to get any lessons from anyone, and especially not on the Belgian side. I mean, we have donated massive amounts of vaccines, and the question is one of who is delivering the fastest, but also who is building capacity. On the Belgian side, we have been active together with Institut Pasteur in Dakar to build a local production facility. We will now also be doing it in Accra in Ghana. We are part of this WHO initiative in South Africa. Much more important than a pure patents discussion, which could lead to months and years of discussion, is what do you do now to build local capacity? And we are playing a big role in that.
I think perhaps, though, there's a point to be made that perhaps it's not either or, donations or patent waiver. It has been expressed by the European Commission as well that, there's a question of whether the know-how exists in other parts of the world and production facilities. But in that case, perhaps waive the patents, see what happens. Those who can produce them will do so, and donations could continue alongside, no?
But honestly, if you would waive the patent, does that mean that everyone has the knowledge to produce? I mean, these are incredibly complex production processes, and we know them quite well because a lot of them have been produced in Belgium. I have the feeling that it has become a highly ideological discussion, which is interesting, but which is not going to help the African population in the next months. The approach we are using, which is building local production capacity, donating a lot of vaccines, doing exportation in practice. I mean, on the European side, we have not put any limits on free trade related to vaccines. If you compare that to some other countries, I mean, we really don't have to take any lessons from anyone. And we have, by far, as Europeans, had the biggest impact on the health of Africans related to, thanks to our vaccine production.
Let's speak about investment in Africa, a huge topic at this summit. The EU planning to invest 150 billion euros in Africa. It's a huge amount of money. It has to be said, though, that's nowhere near what China is planning to invest in Africa in the coming years. Europe is playing catch up with China. I think we can say that. Can it succeed?
Well, honestly, we are by far the #1 partner of the African continent. If you take together everything we do related to trade, to investment, to development cooperation, to investing in fighting climate change, I mean, by far, we are the biggest partner of the African continent, and in a very stable way. The difference is that I think on the communication side, we're maybe not very assertive on what we do. But if you look throughout Africa and you look at infrastructure, very often that infrastructure is financed by Europe. Now, does that mean that we're the only one doing that? No. We know that China is active. We know that Russia is also active. I'm not sure we should always see that as a threat. I mean, the more partners are interested in the development of the African continent, that are interested in the economic opportunity there, the better it is. But indeed, as Europeans, we had to be more coordinated in the way we do it.
And there's also the aspect of conditionality. The European Union puts conditions on its investments of the same commitments it makes in the EU, climate commitments, human rights and things. China doesn't do that. It's not a level playing field.
Well, it's a choice. and we are making that choice, and other countries are making other choices. I think it's a legitimate choice to also talk about human rights, to also talk about rule of law, to also talk about stability and security. And honestly, I think that in the long run, everyone understands what Europe stands for, and that we're stable in that.
A brief word about artefacts. On Thursday, you personally handed over an inventory to the Congolese Prime Minister of tens of thousands of artefacts taken from the former Belgian Congo in colonial times, which are still in a colonial era museum here in Belgium. How much of that inventory do you expect to return? Well,
in total, it's 85,000 assets that are today in Belgium. We have now proposed to the DRC government an approach that where we would do what we would call origination analysis to try to understand, okay, how did this become here? Was it stolen? Was it gotten here based on the usage of violence and so on? And then where agreements can be made to restitute that. We're really a pioneer in this, and I think this is the right approach. I mean, it's not normal that for certain countries their whole history is in Brussels or in Paris and not in their home country. But we really want to do this on a partnership basis, and also based on confidence that we think that the right circumstances to host these artifacts would be there.
All right, Alexander De Croo, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for being my guest on Talking Europe.
My pleasure.
Thanks to you for watching as well. Please do stay tuned. Part 2 coming up in just a few minutes' time.